My husband looked across the dinner table at my injured mother and called her an old hag. He didn't whisper it. He didn't regret it. And in that moment, I realized my marriage was already over. I just hadn't left yet. When my mother needed a place to recover after knee surgery, I never imagined it would expose the ugliest truth about the man I married. She wasn't asking to move in permanently. She wasn't trying to take over our home. She was injured, alone, and vulnerable, and I was her only child. My father had passed away 3 years earlier, and there was no one else to help her through the weeks she couldn't even stand properly on her own. Before she ever packed a bag, I did what I thought a respectful spouse should do. I asked my husband Leonard if it was okay. I didn't assume. I didn't demand. I asked. He smiled and said, "Fine." He said, "No problem." He said, "Whatever you need." He said it in that reassuring tone that made me feel lucky to have such a supportive partner. Looking back now, I realized that smile was the first lie. The moment my mother arrived, everything changed. Leonard's patience evaporated like it had never existed. The complaints started small, almost reasonable if you squinted hard enough. He said she used too much hot water. He said the television was too loud. He said she took too long in the bathroom. He said her medication bottles cluttered the counter. Each complaint came wrapped in irritation, delivered with a sigh that made it clear her presence was an inconvenience he resented deeply. I tried to smooth things over, reminding him she just had surgery and needed time. He insisted he was being patient, and that I didn't appreciate how hard he was trying. That was the first time I felt that subtle twist in my chest, the feeling that somehow I was already failing him by asking for compassion. My mother noticed everything. She always did. She apologized constantly, even for things that weren't her fault. She moved carefully through the house like she was afraid of taking up space. She thanked Leonard every time she walked past him, as if gratitude might soften his irritation. She bought groceries with her own money, even though I told her not to. She helped me cook when she should have been resting, leaning on the counter while peeling vegetables, wincing quietly when her knee hurt too much. Watching her try to make herself invisible in my own home filled me with a kind of shame I didn't know what to do with. I told myself Leonard was just stressed. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself marriage required compromise. What I didn't want to admit was that my husband was showing me exactly who he was when kindness was inconvenient. 2 weeks into our stay, I cooked Leonard's favorite meal, pot roast. I thought maybe familiarity would help. My mother insisted on helping, even though I could see the pain etched into her face as she stood at the counter. Dinner should have been ordinary, comforting even. Instead, it became the moment everything broke. Leonard ate without saying thank you. He scrolled through his phone between bites, acting like neither of us existed. Then his phone rang. It was his friend Barry. Leonard answered at the table without hesitation because manners had never mattered much to him when it came to people he felt entitled to disrespect. Barry asked what he was doing that night. Leonard said he was stuck at home. Barry asked why. Leonard looked directly at my mother and said into the phone, "When is the old hag going home?" He didn't lower his voice. He didn't hesitate. He wanted her to hear it. He went on, laughing, calling her ancient, useless, complaining that she smelled like old lady perfume. He said he couldn't wait for his house to go back to normal. My mother set her fork down slowly. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall in front of him. She excused herself quietly and went to the guest room, closing the door softly behind her. She didn't slam it. She didn't confront him. She disappeared. Because that's what she had learned to do when she was hurt. I sat there frozen while Leonard continued his conversation, laughing and making weekend plans like nothing had happened. When he hung up, he looked at me and asked what my problem was. I asked him if he really just called my mother an old hag. He shrugged. He said he was venting. He said, when we got married, he expected it to be just the two of us. I reminded him that I had asked before she came. He said he didn't realize she would stay so long. I told him it had been 2 weeks. He said 2 weeks was too many. That was the moment I understood something chilling. His agreement had always been conditional. His kindness had an expiration date. I went to the guest room and found my mother sitting on the bed, crying silently, apologizing for causing problems. She offered to leave early. She said she could hire a nurse. She said she didn't want to ruin my marriage. Hearing her take responsibility for Leonard's cruelty broke something inside me. I told her she wasn't going anywhere. I told her she would stay until she was fully healed. I told her Leonard could deal with it. She shook her head and said marriage was hard enough without family drama. She said she would call a car service in the morning. That's when I realized how deeply she had internalized the belief that she was a burden. That night, I moved into the guest room with her. Leonard called me ridiculous. I told him I was being a daughter. My mother stayed another month. Leonard complained every single day. He never apologized. He never softened. He just waited for her to leave like she was a storm he needed to survive. When she finally went home, I helped her pack. I drove her back to her house and made sure she was settled. Then I returned to my own home and packed my own bag. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just left. Because sometimes the loudest decision you can make is walking away quietly. By the time I reached the highway, my hands were shaking. I pulled into an extended stay hotel and sat in my car trying to breathe. I checked in alone. I paid for the room alone. For the first time in years, I made a major financial decision without Leonard. That should have scared me more than it did. Leonard called 17 times that night. Confused, angry, blaming me. Not once did he apologize for what he said about my mother. Listening to those voicemails made something settle inside me with painful clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This was who he had always been. And chapter 1 of my life without him had just begun. The hotel room smelled like old carpet and cleaning chemicals. It was quiet in a way my house never was. No television murmuring in the background, no irritated sighs, no footsteps that made me tense before I even saw who was walking into the room. I sat on the edge of the bed with my suitcase still closed, staring at the beige wall like it might explain what I had just done. Leaving felt unreal, like I'd stepped outside my own life and was watching someone else make decisions I never thought I was brave enough to make. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Leonard's name lit up the screen. I turned the phone face down and let it ring itself into silence. It rang again 30 seconds later. Then again. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I knew if I heard his voice, even for a second, I would start explaining myself. I would start apologizing. I would start doubting everything. So I sat there and listened to the vibrations echo against the cheap wood of the nightstand. Until the phone went quiet again. When it finally stopped, I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief settle in my chest. Guilt for disappearing without explanation. Relief for not having to defend myself to someone who had already decided I was wrong. By midnight, he had called 17 times. I listened to the voicemails in order, lying on the bed with my coat still on, like I might need to leave again at any moment. The first message was confused. He asked where I was, and why I'd left without telling him. His voice sounded almost gentle, like he was trying to be reasonable. The second message carried an edge of irritation. He said this was ridiculous, and that I needed to come home so we could talk like adults. The third was angry. He accused me of making a huge deal out of nothing. By the fourth, he was telling me I was overreacting and being too sensitive. The fifth message was the one that made my stomach twist. He said I was choosing my mother over my husband. That one hurt more than I expected, because it confirmed what he believed our marriage was really about: loyalty, not respect. The messages kept coming. His voice grew louder, sharper, meaner. By the 10th voicemail, he was yelling. By the 15th, he was saying things I would never forget, even if I wanted to. Not once, not a single time, did he apologize for calling my mother an old hag. Not once did he acknowledge that he'd crossed a line. Every message was about how I was hurting him, how I was destroying our marriage, how I needed to stop this nonsense and come home. When the last voicemail ended, I deleted them all and plugged my phone into the charger. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the cord twice before it went in. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally dragged me under. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin hotel curtains, casting pale stripes across the wall. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then everything came rushing back. My mother's shaking hands, Leonard's laughter, the word old hag echoing in my head like it had been carved there. I reached for my phone and checked it instinctively. No new messages. That silence felt heavier than the calls had. I sat up and took a deep breath, then another. The first person I called was my mother. She answered on the first ring. The moment she heard my voice, she asked if I was okay. She asked if Leonard was treating me well. I told her the truth. I told her I had left him. There was a long pause on the line, the kind of silence that carries 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Then she said she was sorry this had happened. She said she understood why I had to go. Her voice cracked when she said it, and I felt my throat tighten. I told her I was staying at a hotel for now. She offered to come get me, to have me stay with her. I told her I needed to figure things out on my own first. She didn't argue. She just said she loved me. When we hung up, I sat there holding my phone like it was something fragile and irreplaceable. I called my boss next. I explained that I had a family emergency and needed to work from home for a few days. She didn't ask for details. She told me to take the time I needed. That small kindness felt like someone loosening a knot in my chest. I opened my laptop and tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to Leonard, to the way he'd dismissed my pain, the way he'd spoken about my mother like she was trash he couldn't wait to throw out. Each time doubt crept in, I remembered the voicemails. I remembered that he still hadn't apologized. 3 days passed in that hotel room. I worked, ate takeout, and tried to plan what came next. On the third day, someone pounded on my door. The sound jolted me so hard I spilled my coffee. I looked through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. Leonard was standing in the hallway. He knocked again and shouted my name, saying we needed to talk. I backed away from the door and called the front desk, telling them my estranged husband was at my door and I needed security. Leonard kept pounding, telling me I couldn't hide from him forever. When the security guards arrived and escorted him away, he shouted that I was making a mistake. I sat on the floor afterward, shaking, realizing something important. I wasn't safe going back. That night, I searched for divorce attorneys. The next day, I sat in a polished office downtown, across from a man named Liam McIntyre, and said the word divorce out loud for the first time. It felt heavy and unreal, but also necessary. Liam explained my rights calmly, like this was just another problem with a solution. He told me I had options. That mattered more than he probably realized. When I left his office, the city looked different, sharper, louder, more real. I drove to a different bank and opened my own account with the little personal savings I had. Watching that balance appear on the screen made me feel both terrified and empowered. Leonard noticed the change immediately. His texts came fast and furious, accusing me of being sneaky, of planning this for months. I didn't respond. I took screenshots and saved them like Liam had advised. For the first time, I wasn't trying to smooth things over. I wasn't trying to explain. I was protecting myself. By the end of that week, I understood something I'd been avoiding for years. My marriage hadn't broken because of one cruel sentence at a dinner table. That sentence had just stripped away the illusion I'd been living under. Leonard didn't respect my mother. And anyone who doesn't respect the woman who raised me would never truly respect me either. That realization didn't make leaving easier, but it made staying impossible. Once the word divorce settled into my life, everything else started to unravel faster than I expected. It wasn't dramatic at first. There were no shouting matches, no public scenes, just a steady drip of realization that the man I married had never intended to let me go quietly. Leonard didn't want to fix what he'd broken. He wanted control back. And the moment he realized I wasn't coming home, his behavior shifted from confused to strategic. The first thing he tried to control was money. Everything we had was joint. Our accounts, our savings, our sense of security. All of it sat under his watchful eye. Leonard always said he was better with finances. He framed it as practicality, but now I could see it for what it really was, leverage. When I opened my own bank account and moved my direct deposit, his response was immediate and vicious. Texts poured in accusing me of stealing from him, of planning this for months, of betraying him. I didn't answer. I documented everything. Each screenshot felt like proof I was finally seeing clearly. Friends started reaching out next. Or rather, his version of events started reaching them. People I had shared dinners with, laughed with, trusted, suddenly wanted to check in. They spoke carefully, like they were handling something fragile. Leonard had told them I left without explanation, that I was emotional, that he was blindsided. Not one of them mentioned my mother. Not one of them asked what he had said to her. I realized how easy it was for someone like Leonard to appear reasonable when the truth made others uncomfortable. The worst call came from his sister. She said Leonard was devastated. She said marriages were hard. She said I should think carefully before throwing everything away. I listened politely and then ended the call without arguing. I didn't owe anyone a justification for choosing dignity. That was a lesson I was learning slowly and painfully. I didn't need permission to leave something that was hurting me. The next time Leonard showed up unannounced was at my mother's house. When her neighbor called to tell me he'd been pounding on the door demanding to know where I was, something inside me went cold. My mother, still healing, had told him to leave and threatened to call the police. Hearing that filled me with equal parts pride and guilt. Pride that she stood her ground. Guilt that my marriage had brought danger to her doorstep. That was the moment I filed for a protective order, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Standing in the courthouse felt surreal. I listed his behavior calmly, fact by fact, like I was describing someone else's life. When the temporary order was granted, I felt a strange sense of relief. Boundaries, it turned out, were not cruel. They were protective. They were overdue. Mediation came next. Sitting across from Leonard in that sterile conference room, I barely recognized him. He avoided my eyes, spoke through his attorney, and acted like I was a hostile stranger instead of his wife of 5 years. When he argued over the house, over money, over every tiny detail, it became painfully clear that this wasn't about fairness. It was about winning. Watching him drain our savings to fund a fight he created felt like another betrayal layered on top of the first. Through all of it, my mother was healing. Slowly, carefully, but steadily. She started talking about the future again, about classes she wanted to take, about friends she wanted to see. Watching her reclaim her life made me realize something important. My marriage hadn't just been shrinking me, it had been shrinking her too. Leonard's cruelty had rippled outward, touching everyone I loved. By the end of chapter 3, I understood that leaving wasn't a single decision. It was a series of choices I had to make every day. To not answer his calls, to not defend myself to people who didn't want the truth, to protect my mother, to protect myself. I wasn't running anymore. I was walking forward, without asking permission, without apologizing for choosing respect over control. And for the first time since I packed my bag, that path felt real. By the time mediation ended without resolution, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt instead was something colder and heavier: clarity. Sitting across from Leonard in that beige conference room, listening to him argue over money he had already taken, watching him twist every fact until he sounded like the victim, I finally understood that the man I married had never wanted a partner. He wanted compliance. And now that he no longer had it, he was scrambling to punish me for taking it away. The drive home after mediation felt longer than it should have. Traffic lights blurred together, and I barely noticed the turns I took. My phone buzzed several times in the passenger seat, but I didn't look at it. I already knew who it was. Leonard didn't know how to sit with silence. Silence meant loss of control, and he couldn't tolerate that. When I finally parked outside my apartment, my hands were shaking again, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Fighting someone who refuses to accept reality drains you in ways you don't expect. That night, my mother called. She asked how mediation went, and I told her the truth, that it was ugly, slow, and far from over. She was quiet for a moment, then said something that stuck with me. She said, "Some people don't fight to fix things. They fight to avoid admitting they were wrong." Hearing that from her, after everything she had endured silently in my marriage, felt like a door closing behind me. I wasn't imagining Leonard's behavior. I wasn't exaggerating it. I was finally seeing it clearly. A few days later, Leonard crossed another line. He showed up at my mother's house again. This time, he didn't just knock. He pounded. He demanded she call me. He accused her of turning me against him. When her neighbor called to warn me, my chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. My mother was still healing. She shouldn't have been dealing with fear at her own front door. That night, I drove straight to her house and sat with her at the kitchen table while she tried to act calm. Her hands trembled when she lifted her tea mug. That was the moment I decided fear would not dictate my choices anymore. The next morning, I went to the courthouse and filed for a protective order. Standing in line, filling out forms, writing down incidents in black ink made everything painfully real. The hotel door, the pounding, the accusations, the intimidation. Leonard's behavior looked different when it was listed on official paperwork instead of dismissed as marital conflict. At the hearing, Leonard stood across the room from me, looking offended rather than ashamed. He said he just wanted to talk. The judge looked tired, like he'd heard that excuse 1,000 times before. When the temporary protective order was granted, something inside me loosened for the first time in months. Safety wasn't dramatic. It was necessary. Leonard reacted exactly how I expected. Rage disguised as wounded pride. He called my actions extreme. He accused me of trying to ruin him. When I blocked his number, he used attorneys. When attorneys didn't get the reaction he wanted, he used guilt. He told people I was unstable. He told them I was overreacting. He told them I had changed. What he didn't say was that he had shown his true self when my mother was vulnerable, and I had finally believed him. The house became the next battlefield. Leonard wanted to keep it and offered me a number so low it was insulting. When my lawyer explained how much equity was actually there, I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that I wasn't powerless. Grief that 5 years of marriage had turned into negotiations and legal calculations. When Leonard emptied the savings account without telling me, something shifted permanently. That money had been our emergency fund. He used it to fight me. That wasn't desperation. That was punishment. I hated asking my mother for help. Hated it with a deep, twisting shame. But when she offered without hesitation, I realized something important. Leonard had spent years convincing me that independence meant isolation, that needing help was weakness. My mother showed me the opposite. Support didn't make me weak. It made me safe. It made me human. Work became my refuge. Numbers made sense when people didn't. Deadlines didn't gaslight you. Tasks had clear beginnings and endings. My boss noticed the shift, my focus, my drive, and gave me more responsibility instead of pity. That mattered more than she knew. It reminded me I was capable, competent, and not broken. Friends, on the other hand, disappointed me. Mutual friends took Leonard's side by default. They said things like marriage is hard, and everyone makes mistakes without asking what the mistake actually was. They asked why I wouldn't try harder. They never asked why Leonard never apologized. That silence told me everything. Losing people hurt, but not as much as pretending they understood when they didn't. The mediation offer eventually came again. Higher this time, but still unfair. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the numbers, weighing peace against principle. My lawyer explained the costs of continuing the fight. The time, the stress, the emotional toll. I thought about my mother's nightmares, about the way she flinched at loud knocks now. I thought about how tired I was. And I realized something profound. Choosing peace wasn't the same as giving up. It was choosing my future over my pride. I accepted the settlement. Signing the agreement felt anticlimactic. No dramatic release, no sudden joy, just a quiet understanding that this chapter of my life was closing, whether I mourned it or not. When Leonard was served the final papers, he exploded again, accusing me of humiliation, of destruction, of cruelty. I hung up mid-sentence and blocked him everywhere. For the first time, his anger didn't reach me. It bounced off boundaries I had finally built. That night, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by furniture I chose, walls I painted, silence that felt safe instead of suffocating. I cried, not because I wanted him back, but because I was grieving the woman I used to be, the woman who tolerated disrespect, the woman who apologized for other people's cruelty, the woman who believed love meant endurance. Chapter 4 wasn't about victory. It was about release. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The divorce papers arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. No dramatic music, no sense of triumph, just a thin envelope with official stamps and legal language that reduced 5 years of marriage to a single page of typed words and a judge's signature. I held it for a long moment before opening it, like the paper might weigh more if I delayed. When I finally read it, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not sadness, but quiet finality. This chapter was over, whether I was ready or not. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring, like she always did. When I told her the divorce was final, she was quiet for a moment, and then said something I'll never forget. She said, "Endings are complicated, even when they're necessary." She didn't tell me to celebrate. She didn't tell me to be strong. She just acknowledged the truth, that losing something painful can still hurt. That understanding felt like a balm I didn't know I needed. Life didn't magically get better after the divorce finalized. It got honest. My apartment was small, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture in it existed because I chose it, not because it was practical or efficient or approved by someone else. The silence at night no longer felt heavy. It felt safe. I slept better than I had in years. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I stopped bracing myself for criticism when I walked into a room. My mother healed in ways that had nothing to do with her knee. She joined a book club. She started watercolor painting at the senior center. She laughed more, real laughter, the kind that comes from feeling seen instead of tolerated. One night at dinner she told me she was proud of me. Not for leaving Leonard, but for showing her that it was never too late to expect respect. Hearing that made me realize something profound. Walking away hadn't just saved me. It had freed her too. Work became a place of growth instead of escape. I took on more responsibility. I trusted my instincts. When my boss offered me a promotion, I didn't second-guess myself or ask if I was ready. I said yes. The raise meant I could breathe easier financially, but the confidence meant more. It proved that I was capable on my own, not because I survived divorce, but because I stopped shrinking myself to fit someone else's expectations. Friendships changed. Some people disappeared quietly, choosing comfort over truth. Others stepped closer. Camila stayed. She listened. She didn't try to fix me or convince me to forgive anyone who hadn't earned it. She invited me into her life instead of treating me like a cautionary tale. Together we planned trips, joined classes, laughed about things that had nothing to do with Leonard or my past. For the first time in years, I felt excitement about the future instead of anxiety about maintaining peace. There were still hard days. Days when I wondered if leaving had been an overreaction. Days when loneliness crept in and whispered that staying might have been easier. But then I remembered the dinner table, the phone call, the way my mother cried silently in a guest room because my husband couldn't offer basic decency. And I knew, staying would have cost me myself. A year later, my life looks nothing like the one I thought I was building when I married Leonard. And I'm grateful for that. I trust my judgment now. I don't apologize for taking up space. I don't mistake tolerance for love or silence for peace. I know that respect isn't something you negotiate for. It's the bare minimum. Leaving wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing I deserved better all along. And once I believed that, everything else followed.